"Please don't come inside," said a single obese girl. To the mean and lonely mountain man who wanted her love, Blackstone Ridge vanished beneath a white roar, the kind of Montana blizzard that erased tracks and second chances alike. In a lantern-lit cottage at the town's edge, Marigold Mari Fletcher packed poultices and wrapped herbs with hands that had steadied 100 mothers through midnight pain. She was 28, soft-cheeked and sturdy, a healer with a kitchen that smelled of pine, smoke, and thyme. She had learned to live with the town's kind smiles and cruel silences, the ones that said she was useful, but never chosen. The knocking started as a dull thud, then rose like a fist against fate. Mari lifted the latch and stared into a wall of wind, and a man who looked carved from the mountain itself. Silas Thornwood towered over her threshold, hair silvered, beard rimed with ice, a long scar pale against winter skin. The bitter mountain man, the gossip said, buried his heart with his wife and child 20 years ago and never dug it up again. Snow sheeted off his shoulders. Blood seeped slowly beneath his coat at the shoulder. His voice was roughened stone. "I need help." Instinct moved faster than fear. "Come in, now." He braced a hand against the jamb, pride fighting common sense. "No, just a bandage." His knees wobbled. "I'll be gone. Then you'll be dead." She stepped into the storm, palm flat to his chest, steady as a promise. "Please don't come inside." She caught her breath, corrected, eyes fierce. "My doorway and try to leave again. If you cross this threshold, you stay until I say you're safe. Do you understand?" Wind howled. His jaw clenched. At last, Silas nodded once. Inside, heat rushed him. Mari cut away the frozen coat, revealed a ripped shoulder, claw or blade, cleaned it, stitched with swift, sure strokes. He barely flinched. She barely blinked. "Lie down," she ordered when it was done. "I'll take the floor." "You'll take the bed," she said, already fluffing pillows, "and you'll take my worry until that fever breaks." Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a different weather began, a thaw neither of them had expected. By morning, the storm still howled like a wounded beast. Snow pressed against the window panes, sealing the world away in white silence. Inside, the cottage glowed with the soft gold of Mari's hearth. Silas Thornwood lay half awake beneath quilts that smelled faintly of cedar and sage. The fever had loosened its grip, but his body ached with a bone-deep weariness that no wound alone could explain. He watched the woman move quietly through her kitchen, the steady rhythm of hands grinding herbs, the whisper of kettle steam. She was not like the women he remembered from long ago. No corseted fragility, no polished gentleness meant to impress. Marigold Fletcher was earth-made human, solid, warm, enduring. She hummed as she worked, unaware of his gaze, the tune low and sweet, like the murmur of rain on a cabin roof. "Drink this," she said, breaking his thoughts. She brought a cup of willow bark tea to his bedside. "It'll help the pain." He took it with a hand that could have crushed stone, but trembled slightly now. "Why are you doing this?" Her brow furrowed. "Because you're hurt." "I've been hurt before. People usually let me bleed." Mari sat on the edge of a chair, meeting his eyes. "Then they weren't healers, and they weren't decent." He tried to look away, but her calm steadiness pinned him. "You don't know what kind of man I am." "I know what kind of man you are tonight," she said softly. "One who needs rest. That's enough for now." He grunted something close to a laugh, rusty, unused. "The town calls you Miss Fletcher. the fat apothecary with too much heart. Mari flinched just slightly. "Yes," she said, "they do. But hearts can't be too big, Mr. Thornwood. They can only be too empty." Silas looked at her for a long time, longer than he had looked at anyone in years. He saw no pity in her eyes, only quiet defiance. It unsettled him more than any predator ever had. Outside, the wind beat against the walls, but the cottage held steady. Days slipped into one another. Silas healed slowly, but not just in body. He began to chop firewood when he could stand, repair her fence when his shoulder allowed. Each task was clumsy at first, his hands more used to solitude than service, but Mari's patient instruction softened his rough edges. One afternoon, as she showed him how to stir a pot of broth without scorching it, he said, almost grudgingly, "You're not afraid of me." Mari turned, meeting his gaze. "Should I be? Everyone else is. I'm not everyone else." He almost smiled. Almost. "No," he said, "you're not." That night, as he sat by the fire mending one of her broken baskets, he noticed a small book on the table. Its spine cracked, pages filled with neat handwriting. He turned one page and read a line aloud. "To heal another is to borrow their pain for a while until it no longer owns them." Mari looked up from her sewing. "My grandmother wrote that. She taught me medicine. She said pain doesn't disappear. It just moves from one heart to another until it finds somewhere soft enough to rest." Silas's voice was rough when he asked, "And what if a man's heart turned to stone a long time ago?" She smiled, slow and sad. "Then maybe it's time someone warmed it back to life." He looked into the fire, and for the first time in decades, the flame reflected in eyes that weren't empty anymore. When the storm finally broke, it left the world buried in silence, miles of snow glittering beneath a pale blue sky. Smoke from Mari's chimney curled upward, the only sign of life for miles. Silas stood at the doorway, his broad frame filling it, his arms still stiff beneath the fresh bandages. "The road's clear enough," he said quietly. "I'll head back to my cabin before dusk." Mari turned from the stove, where she was stirring a pot of venison stew. "You're not ready." "I've been through worse." "I'm sure you have," she replied, not looking at him. "But pride doesn't stop infection." Her calm tone made him pause. She ladled stew into 2 bowls, set one in front of him. "Eat first. If you still want to go after that, I won't stop you." He hesitated, then sat. The smell, thyme, juniper, slow-simmered meat, was warm enough to thaw even his iron will. They ate in silence until Mari said softly, "You don't have to keep proving you can survive alone, Silas. No one's watching." He stared into his bowl, jaw tight. "That's the point, isn't it? No one's watching." Mari folded her hands on the table. "Maybe that's why you keep finding ways to get hurt. So someone will." He lifted his gaze slowly, and the old ache behind his eyes showed itself. "You think I wanted this?" "No," she said gently, "but maybe you wanted to stop being invisible." Silas stood abruptly, pushing the chair back. "You don't know me, woman." "Then stay," she said simply. "Let me learn." The words hung in the air like the first breath after drowning. He turned away, staring out the frost-covered window, but something inside him cracked, quiet, small, dangerous in its tenderness. That night, he didn't leave. Days became a rhythm. Neither of them spoke aloud. Silas hauled in wood, fixed the shutter that had creaked for years. Mari treated the sick who braved the snow, and Silas began accompanying her on calls, first as protection, then as silent company. He'd wait outside while she delivered herbs or tended a fever, his hulking figure frightening off strayed dogs and restless men. One afternoon, as they returned from a distant homestead, Mari slipped on an icy patch. Silas caught her instinctively, his large hand wrapping around her waist. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Hers wide with surprise, his full of something he didn't want to name. She looked away first, cheeks flushed pink. "Thank you," she murmured. He cleared his throat. "You should watch your step." "I was," she said softly, "but you were in the way." It was a small thing, almost nothing. Yet that night, as he lay on the cot by her hearth, Silas couldn't stop replaying it. The warmth of her, the way she hadn't flinched. He had been touched by pity, by fear, even by desire once long ago. But this quiet trust, felt different, dangerous. A week later, while mending his coat, Mari asked without looking up, "Do you ever visit your wife's grave?" The question struck him like a blow. He froze. "No." "Why?" He swallowed hard. "Because she's not there. Whatever was left of her, I buried it with myself." Mari put her needle down, her voice low. "Then maybe it's time you dig yourself up, Mr. Thornwood." He looked at her across the fire, and the heat between them wasn't from the flames. For the first time, Silas didn't see the healer or the soft girl the town dismissed. He saw a woman who refused to turn away from his darkness. That night, while she slept in her chair by the hearth, Silas sat awake watching the embers die to ash. He whispered into the quiet, Maybe I don't want to be alone anymore." And in the dim light, he realized that the most frightening thing in the world wasn't the thought of losing someone again. It was the thought of being loved despite all the reasons he shouldn't be. Winter lingered longer than usual that year, as if the mountains themselves refused to release Silas Thornwood and Marigold Fletcher from the spell of quiet that had bound them together. The snow piled higher, the roads disappeared again, and what began as circumstance became a rhythm, two lives interwoven by routine, necessity, and a slow, unspoken tenderness. Each morning, Silas rose before dawn to split firewood. The sound of his axe echoed through the frozen valley, steady and certain, while smoke drifted from Mari's chimney, a signal that coffee was ready and the day had begun. When he returned, she would have a bowl of hot porridge waiting on the table. He'd grunt his thanks. She'd pretend not to notice how his rough voice softened when he said it. They ate in silence, comfortable now in the space between words. Mari worked long hours mixing herbs, sewing bandages, tending to villagers who came despite the cold. Silas began to build shelves for her jars, repair broken furniture, even fashion new tools from scraps of iron. When she thanked him, he only shrugged and muttered, "Can't have you working in a place that creaks worse than I do." But the truth was simpler. He wanted to make her life easier because she had made his bearable. One evening, as the wind screamed outside, Mari sat by the fire, embroidering a patch on Silas's coat. "You've been quiet today," she said without looking up. He grunted. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange it feels, having someone to come home to again." Mari's hands stilled. "Does it hurt to feel that way?" He looked into the fire. "Sometimes, because I keep waiting for it to be taken away." She set the needle down, her voice steady but soft. "Then stop waiting. Start believing instead." He met her eyes, those warm, unwavering eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. the kind of understanding that only grows in silence shared through too many nights. Later, as she poured him tea, he noticed her hands tremble slightly from exhaustion. He reached out, covering her fingers with his, rough skin against soft warmth. "You work too much," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "And you worry too much." "That's because someone has to," he replied, his thumb brushing the back of her hand before he realized it. He pulled back quickly, clearing his throat. "You should sleep." "And you should stop hiding behind gruffness," she teased gently. He couldn't help it. He laughed, a low, genuine sound that startled them both. The laugh faded, but the warmth lingered. Weeks turned into months. The snow began to melt in slow rivers down the mountainside. They prepared for spring together, planting seeds, patching the roof, cleaning the garden where crocuses pushed through thawing soil. One afternoon, while tending the herbs behind the cabin, Mari said, "You never told me what brought you to my door that night." Silas's eyes followed the horizon. "I told myself it was the storm," he said quietly. "But maybe I was running out of reasons to stay alone." Mari looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "And now?" He hesitated, then said the truth. "Now, I'm afraid of what'll happen when I stop running." She reached for his hand, dirt under her nails, life in her grip. "Then stay still, Silas. Let something good catch up to you." He turned to her, slow, uncertain, as if the act itself might break him. But when he looked at her face, flushed from sun and wind, all the walls he'd built over the years began to crumble. He took her hand fully this time. "You've already caught me, Mari." They stood like that for a long while, the wind soft between them, the smell of thawing pine thick in the air. Later, when night fell and they sat by the fire, Silas found himself speaking of things he had buried for decades. His wife's laughter, his son's small hands, the sound of a cry that never came again. Mari listened, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, never interrupting. When he finished, he whispered, "I thought loving once was enough for any lifetime." Mari leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Maybe it was, but sometimes love returns to those who need redemption more than they need peace." He stared at her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "And what if I don't deserve it?" She smiled, a slow, knowing thing. "You don't have to deserve love, Silas. You just have to accept it." And for the first time since his world had fallen apart, Silas Thornwood reached across the space between loneliness and hope, and didn't find it empty. Spring brought more than green to Blackstone Ridge. It brought people. Wagons creaked up muddy roads, traders passed through, and news from the world below began to trickle in again. For months, Mari and Silas had lived in a kind of suspended peace, but the thaw was breaking more than the snow. One morning, while Mari was gathering herbs near the edge of town, a rider appeared on the ridge road, a lean man in a dark coat, his horse lathered from hard travel. He stopped before her gate and called out, "Miss Fletcher?" She turned, cautious. "Yes." He dismounted and removed his hat. "Marshal Edwin Pike, ma'am. I'm looking for a man. Silas Thornwood. Tall scar across his face. You seen him?" Her pulse stuttered. "Why are you looking for him?" The marshal's eyes were steady. "He's wanted for an old charge in Helena. Said to have killed a man 20 years back. Self-defense, maybe, but he disappeared before the law could decide." Mari's mouth went dry. She shook her head slowly. "I don't know anything about that." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "If you do, ma'am, Tell him the past has a way of catching up." The marshal rode off, leaving muddy tracks and silence behind him. That night, Mari found Silas outside splitting wood, the rhythm of his axe as steady as ever. But she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he froze when she said, "A man came looking for you." He lowered the axe. "Marshal Pike? You knew he'd come." He sighed, the sound heavy with years. "He's been following ghosts a long time." "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "Did you kill someone?" Silas leaned on the axe handle, staring into the darkness. "It was 20 years ago, a fight gone bad. He was a trapper, drunk, angry, said things about Eleanor, my wife. I warned him to stop. He didn't. I swung first, but he drew his knife. I didn't mean to kill him, Mari, but once blood's on your hands, it never washes off." Mari stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You've carried that alone all these years?" He nodded. "That's why I left the towns, why I buried myself up there. I thought I could pay for it by being alone." She touched his arm. "You've already paid, Silas. A man who feels guilt that long has served his sentence." But he shook his head. "The law won't see it that way, and I won't let them drag you into it." The next morning, he was gone. Mari woke to find the fire cold, his coat missing, the bed neatly folded, and her heart hollow. For 2 days, the town whispered that the bitter mountain man had vanished again. But on the 3rd day, a new sound echoed through the valley, the crack of gunfire near the ridge. Mari didn't hesitate. She took her cloak, mounted her mule, and followed the sound through melting snow and pine. When she found them, the marshal's men had cornered Silas near the cliffside. He stood with his rifle lowered, hands raised. "I'm done running," he said. Mari shouted, "Stop! He's not who you think he is." The marshal turned. "Ma'am, stand back." "No!" she cried, running to Silas's side. "He came down here to surrender, not to fight. You want justice? Fine, but you'll have to shoot through me first." The wind howled, carrying the echo of her words across the ridge. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Silas spoke, his voice low, rough with awe. "Mari." She turned to him, tears freezing on her cheeks. "You said once you didn't deserve love, but I decide who deserves mine." The marshal lowered his gun slowly. "I'll take your statement, Thornwood. If it was self-defense, you'll walk free. The world's changed since then. Maybe it's time you stopped punishing yourself." Silas nodded, but his eyes never left Mari's. "She's the reason I can stand here," he said softly. "The reason I want to live." When they rode back to town, side by side, the whole valley seemed to breathe again. The trial in Helena was quiet but heavy, like a church service for a soul still learning how to forgive itself. Silas Thornwood stood before the judge, shoulders straight, his scar catching the dim light through the courthouse windows. He had faced blizzards, bears, and loneliness. But this, standing before men instead of mountains, felt like the hardest climb of all. Mari sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't left his side since the arrest. She had ridden all the way from Blackstone Ridge, testifying to his character, describing how he had changed, how the man she knew wasn't a fugitive, but a healer of hearts. When it came time for Silas to speak, he rose slowly. "I don't deny what I did," he said. His voice filled the room, low and steady. "A man died by my hand 20 years ago. I spent the years since punishing myself, thinking solitude could balance the scales. But it doesn't. It only rots the soul." He turned toward Mari. "Then someone reminded me that living isn't a sentence. It's a chance to make amends. I came down that mountain to surrender because I finally had someone worth living honest for." The courtroom murmured, and even the judge, an old man with weathered hands, paused before speaking. "Mr. Thornwood, the records confirm this was self-defense. The man you killed drew first. The law has no quarrel with you." A hush spread. Silas blinked once, as if unsure he had heard correctly. Mari pressed her hands to her mouth, tears breaking free. The judge continued, softer now. "Go home, Mr. Thornwood, and try not to waste another 20 years being afraid to live." Outside, when the sun hit his face for the first time as a free man, Silas turned to Mari. She was crying, laughing all at once, her bonnet askew in the wind. "I told you," she whispered, "you'd already paid your debt." He took her hands, rough palms closing around hers. "You're the only reason I found the courage to face it." Mari smiled through her tears. "Then let's go home, Silas. The mountain's waiting." When they returned to Blackstone Ridge, spring had fully bloomed. The cabin stood warm and alive, its windows bright, the garden Mari had planted stretching green beneath the pines. Silas paused at the doorway, the same doorway he had once bled through, the same one she'd barred him from leaving until he was safe. He looked at her, voice low, full of memory. "The first night I came here, you said, 'Please don't come inside unless you'll stay.'" She stepped close, her eyes shining. "Are you staying, Silas?" He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Forever." When he kissed her, the fire crackled, the wind softened, and for the first time in 2 decades, Blackstone Ridge felt like home again. Summer came early to the ridge that year, as if the mountain itself had grown eager to see Silas and Mari begin again. Wild flowers colored the slopes, and the river that once froze solid now sang through the valley like a hymn. The cabin, once silent and gray, breathed with life. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, windows gleamed clean, and laughter spilled from inside, the kind that comes only when sorrow has finally loosened its grip. Silas built a porch swing for Mari, carving her initials into the wooden beam above it. Every evening they sat together there, watching the sunset melt behind the peaks. Sometimes he read to her from an old leather book. Sometimes they said nothing at all, content to listen to the world settle. One afternoon, a young mother arrived from town with a feverish child. Mari tended to the boy while Silas fetched water and split wood for the stove. When the child's breathing steadied, the mother looked at them both with tears in her eyes. "You saved him," she whispered. Mari smiled. "We just gave him warmth. The mountain did the rest." As the woman rode away, Silas turned to her. "You realize they all call this place the healer's house now?" Mari laughed softly. "Then maybe it healed more than just them." He reached out, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "Aye," he said quietly, "it healed me." They sat in silence as the evening light deepened, a silence that no longer carried loneliness, but peace. When the stars rose over Blackstone Ridge, Silas squeezed her hand and whispered, "You told me not to come inside unless I meant to stay. I did, Mari. I'm still here." And she smiled, because she already knew. If you've listened this far, remember this. Even the coldest hearts can thaw when touched by kindness. Silas Thornwood thought his story ended in loss, and Mari Fletcher thought love had forgotten her. But the mountain had one last mercy left to give. Sometimes love doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes quietly, through open doors, stitched wounds, and the courage to stay when leaving would be easier. So wherever you are tonight, by firelight, by city glow, or beneath your own silent sky, ask yourself this: would you let someone come inside your heart if they promised never to leave?